guys have got here just in the nick of time. What does that make us?
Big damn heroes, sir.
Ain't we just?
One of the persistent arguments I get from the chemtrail faithful is that chemtrails last longer than regular contrails. Of course, this is merely a subjective observation unsupported by any sort of facts at all. In an earlier video, I addressed how clean-burning engines and increased moisture in the atmosphere can create more frequent and more persistent contrails. Recently, I had the opportunity to roughly measure and film a contrail being left by an American Eagle Embraer regional jet flying at 27,000 feet eastbound over Indiana. I know this because I saw the aircraft with my own eyes leaving the contrail. I'd like to point out a couple of interesting features about this particular contrail. Note that it is forming above the cloud layer. According to the myth, this would be a pointless location for spraying anything. In fact, this is above a warm front that was draped over the region where there was lots of moisture being pulled into the upper atmosphere by a low pressure system located westward in northern Iowa. At this point, our aircraft was making about 400 knots across the ground in a climb with a slight headwind when we passed the eastbound RJ. As we leveled off and accelerated, the same trail continued unbroken and roughly parallel to our westbound track for roughly the next hour or so of flight before being lost in the frontal clouds and darkness. This means that just the section of trail we saw was over 400 statute miles long and lasted well over 2 hours when you do the combined travel time of our two aircraft. Keep in mind, those supporting the chemtrail myth say that this is utterly impossible. Natural contrails are short, never lasting more than 15 minutes. Yet here's proof that that is utterly wrong. One thing that the chemtrail enthusiasts seem to fail to realize is just how big the sky is. Let's take a look at this by assuming for a second that that RJ was in fact a chemtrail aircraft. For the sake of argument, we'll say that the aircraft doesn't need to worry about carrying fuel and that all of its useful load can be dedicated to carrying chemicals. In this case, that would be 4,198 kilograms worth. Now we'll assume that the aircraft jettisoned its entire payload over the 400 nautical miles that I observed. That works out to be roughly 10.5 kilograms per nautical mile. Assuming the spray was distributed in a column 50 feet by 50 feet, given the length of the nautical mile, that means that that 10.5 kilograms was spread over a space of roughly 15 million cubic feet. 10.5 kilograms spread over that 15 million cubic feet works out to be roughly 0.69 milligrams per cubic foot. To put that into perspective, that's less than taking 1/100th of a tablet of aspirin and dividing it into 7.5 gallons of water. Now even that amount of chemical is so slight that it would have to be extraordinarily toxic to cause any health effects, even at that concentration. But we're not done yet. By the time it reaches the ground, it's descended through another 27,000 vertical feet. By the time it diffused downward through the 27,000 feet and outward proportionally, it would be diluted downward to the point of being nearly zero. This demonstrates yet another reason why chemtrails are such a myth. High-altitude distribution of chemicals is utterly impractical. This is one reason why crop dusters have to fly so incredibly low in order to be effective. As I've dug into the chemtrail mythology, I found it's rather like a 7-layered dip of crazy. For example, I just learned about this whole new set of crazy called Sylphs. Sylphs are these living cloud creatures, often cited as being immigrants from Jupiter, who, and I'm not making this up, eat chemtrails, turning them into wholesome air. Now, this might be a tad difficult to understand, so here's a brief animation showing a sylph in action. Yes, I'm afraid it really is that silly. Leaving aside the utterly ridiculous physics of invisible creatures able to transmute chemical elements without any sort of detectable radiation being released, the believers have pictures. This is one. Where is it, you ask? Right there. No, that cloud is the Sylph, according to the believers. This particular cloud is a fairly uncommon type of cloud known as the altocumulus flocus, from the Latin for flock, a sign of some mildly unstable air at mid-altitudes. It's well understood that the human brain is programmed to detect patterns, particularly human faces, whether they are real or not. To some extent, this explains our cloud buddies, the Sylphs. Here's another example of one of these cloud critters. This particular one had a nice blog describing how it spread out a chemtrail and then ate it. What's really telling is that the blog goes on to say that the next day it rained. Now why might that be? The answer is simple. This cloud isn't a critter, it's a cirrus or mare's tail cloud associated with the jet stream. The jet stream is a belt of high-speed wind that circles the Earth. As it flows, it rolls, forming a vortex. Where the rising side of the vortex encounters moisture, such as near a frontal surface, the clouds can form. These clouds often look similar to a contrail and can spread out as the jet stream rolls them upward like a conveyor belt. Because they occur near a front, mare's tails often indicate an impending change in the weather. This is exactly what our blogger experienced, the appearance of a mare's tail cloud in advance of a frontal system that brought rain to the area. No invisible cloud monster needed. But, just because it's cool, let's look at the animation one more time.
If I'm your mission, Shepard, best give it up. You're welcome on my boat. God ain't.